guest today is Sabine Freizer, who is the Europe Program Director for the International Crisis Group. Sabine has been in and throughout the region over many years and is often at the receiving end of more often criticism than accolades, because the International Crisis Group's projection of what can and ought to happen in the peace process and what the sides often think are not always the same. Today we've asked Sabine to pull out our crystal ball and talk about what we can realistically expect of the president's meeting today. It is the beginning of the year. They needed to do something. It's not too far off from the Russian elections, and what does that mean about Medvedev's continuing involvement? Sabine, thank you for being with us. Let's start with President Medvedev, perhaps. What does this mean? Is this possibly his last meeting? Is this going to be some indication of whether this was a Russian initiative or a Medvedev initiative?
Yeah, I think that this very much might be the last meeting that Medvedev participated in. And in many ways, that's very unfortunate, because my feeling is that he was very much personally involved in this process, staked political capital in trying to get a solution, and really believed that it was possible. So now that he is going to have to pull out, that puts in question the continuation of the Russian involvement in the sense of having somebody who's really personally engaged in the process. It seems that Putin is less committed to this process. So yes, it is I think we're going to see a change with Medvedev pulling out.
When this process last hit a wall, it was amidst talk that the Azerbaijani side had appeared to be willing to come to some sort of agreement, and then continued negotiating, saying, oh no, we have 10 more demands. Do we know anything about what happened to those 10 more demands? Lavrov came, Lavrov went. Where are we now?
I mean, first of all, let me say that there are different opinions about what happened in Kazan and why the talks failed. Of course, it is very unfortunate that those talks did fail, because there was so much expectation that they would go well. There had been statements by the co-chairs before the talks saying that this was a moment where there should be an agreement. Some of the reports after Kazan were that yes, the Azerbaijanis put 10 or 12 extra points on the table in Kazan, and that's why it failed. But the Azerbaijani response to that is that no, they weren't the ones that put extra conditions, but it was the Russians that put in some extra points on the way to Kazan. So I should say that this is again both sides kind of blaming each other. And unfortunately, I think it's arguing about nitpicky details. The fact is that both the leadership in Armenia and in Azerbaijan has said over the past few years that they agree to the basic principles. So I think that if we kind of limit the detail and just focus on the principles, that would be the way forward.
The International Crisis Group has often said that the civil societies on both sides are not engaged enough. Of course, not just ICG, and many international organizations say that. And today we're at a point that perhaps if there were more vocal, visible calls for some sort of movement forward from the peoples on both sides, would that process perhaps move forward any better?
Yes, I mean, of course, the societies both in Azerbaijan and Armenia should be more involved to get this process moving forward. This is a great opportunity to do that, because the next year is going to be full of elections, both in Armenia and Azerbaijan in the co-chair countries. So I think it's going to be very difficult to actually make a political compromise. So it's time to kind of fill that space with more civil society interactions. Now, the question is whether or not the societies in Azerbaijan and Armenia are interested in these kind of things. Of course, I think the societies are interested in the conflict, but unfortunately, we're seeing less of an interest amongst average people to engage with each other. So here, some of the calls for more civil society engagement are actually coming from outside, people like Crisis Group, from the co-chairs. But what I hope to see is actually societies in Armenia and Azerbaijan to also demand more engagement.
You and I have talked about this, and I disagree. I think that, at least from the Armenian side, there is always interest in engaging people from Azerbaijan. I my experience has been that it is the Azerbaijani institutional response that's usually negative, not even the individual response in Azerbaijan, but the institutional response. Sabine Freizer of the International Crisis Group, since we don't get to go to Baku, what can you say about the interest there of for peace, of the peace movement, the interrelationship there of those few perhaps, but those who do call for peace, and their interactions with those who are trying to move towards more democratization? Does peace have a chance?
I mean, one thing I want to say is that I was very surprised during my last trip to Baku, which was in November this year, because when I heard in Baku this time, from all levels, from the foreign minister, through the foreign ministry, presidential administration, civil society, universities, what I heard at all levels is that they actually now do want to engage more with Armenians. Now, of course, when they talk about that, the Azerbaijanis say that they want to engage with Armenians that are currently living in Nagorno Karabakh. But if you push them a little bit and you say, well, what about Armenians in general, Armenians that are originally from Baku or other Armenians, they even admit that they would like to have more engagement on that level. Now, for me, this is a huge change because in the past, Azerbaijan has been very resistant to welcome those kind of initiatives. Azerbaijan has actually even sanctioned people who have traveled to Nagorno-Karabakh or had significant links with Armenia. So I think that there is a change right now, and Azerbaijan is opening itself to engagement because Azerbaijan is in a different place right now. It's quite ambitious today, now that it has a seat on the UN Security Council, that it has Eurovision coming to town. At least it's trying to project a much more open image. So perhaps this will mean that there will be ways to follow up and to do more civil society work between Armenia and Azerbaijan.
Yeah, we accept the hopefulness. The cynicism, unfortunately, doesn't die away, but that interaction is necessary is, I think, something that no one will disagree with. I'll editorialize a little more. It's also unfortunate that we need to hear from about Baku through the International Crisis Group and other third parties, and it's not something that we can do directly ourselves. But we'll still wait for those invitations. Thank you, Sabine, and perhaps we can talk again later once there is some information about today's meeting. Thank you, Sabine Freizer, International Crisis Group.
Thank you.